Good afternoon. This is Media Center, Ukraine, Odesa. We continue for today. And our current briefing is dedicated to accessibility of the urban space. Unfortunately, Ukraine is facing the increased number of people with disabilities, and these problems have become even more important for our country. And I hope that we will be able to solve this issue. I would like to give floor to Oleh Sokolov, Commissioner for Human Rights of People with Disabilities in Odesa Oblast, who will share details about his experience, his monitoring, and will describe the general picture about our region with regard to accessibility. Good afternoon. When it comes to accessibility in our region, I can say that I wish Odesa and Odesa Oblast to become accessible because it is now very difficult to get to facilities. There are issues with the transportation, with the different services, and now we have a lot of injured servicemen who struggle to get in a wheelchair from one place to another in our city. When it comes to old buildings, they are inaccessible, and they can't change the architectural design, they cannot add a ramp or a lift. And for people in wheelchair, it is difficult to get anywhere. And for example, there is the problem with the railway station, and actually they have to go additional distance to get to the railway station because of its inaccessibility for people in a wheelchair. And we have the issues with the public transportation. We need to have special buses for people with disabilities with working ramps. Thank you. You actually have mentioned before that you are going to monitor the public transport. Yes. We want to get reach to the city mayor or his deputy and to monitor public transport together with the company responsible for its work. And Dmytro did this before, and I hope that we will continue monitoring the situation in our city. Thank you. And now I would like to give floor to Dmytro, who has been dealing with the accessibility issue over recent years. How has the situation changed for the last year? Good afternoon. We dealt with the issue of accessibility back in 2014, and for me, as for other Ukrainian citizens, back then it was clear that the war will be a full scale, that this would be a bloody war, and this meant that we will have an increased number of amputants in our country. And since 2014, we have been trying to raise the issue in the society, but unfortunately, every time there were some more important issues like elections and other things, and no one dealt with the issue seriously. In 2018, we managed to organize the monitoring of the city by the ombudsman, and his conclusion was clear that Odesa is not an accessible city for people with disabilities. But actually, in the country in general, there is no village, town, or city that is fully accessible. And I'd like to say that people who should be responsible for accessibility, they pretend that something is done. The relevant convention was signed in 2010, so 13 years ago. 13 years they have been pretending to do something, but in the reality they haven't done anything, because actually accessibility is not a variable measure. It is either there or not. There is no accessibility at the moment, and this is very sad because now there is the war in our country, and the Russian Federation uses firewall of artillery, and unfortunately every day we have new injured people with severe injuries. A lot of these people will become amputants or will have disabilities. Our society does everything possible to support our military. We raise money for uniform, for drones, and this is great. But unfortunately, there are people who have sacrificed the most valuable thing they have. This is their health. And no one cares about them. No one cares about how they will be able to continue their life in our towns, cities, and villages. And now there are posts with photos of people who lost their limbs, and people just wish them health. They leave comments like "glory to heroes," but people don't understand how they can support amputants. And thank you very much for raising this topic here in the media center. And the most important thing for this issue is to raise it, to bring it to the national level. People should post about lack of accessibility on their social pages, in social media. And our president says that life is the most valuable thing. And this is right. We take care about our servicemen. We remember our fallen heroes, but our problem is that we don't care about the wounded, about the injured. And without accessibility, these people will just be locked in their homes. If they are wounded because of the Russian Federation who has attacked us, but we will be blamed for those people not being able to go outside. And I actually rely upon the support of veterans, upon servicemen, and there are hundreds of the relevant organizations to support people with disabilities, but unfortunately this number has not improved the situation in our country. Veterans should require from our authorities, from local government, to do everything possible to make this accessibility real. Thank you very much. Tetiana Lyvandovska is a physiotherapist from the rehabilitation center MOTUS. As far as I understand, you work with people with disabilities with different issues. What they tell you? What can you see like a specialist in this area? As a specialist in this area, I would like to first agree with what has been mentioned by our previous speakers. And secondly, I would like to say that the lack of accessibility in our urban space starts not from an apartment or from streets. They start with our hospitals, because unfortunately I have a close person who was injured, who was a child back then, and that person, that child, that boy, had to spend 2 months in the regional children hospital, and there is a small Soviet lift, and the hospital is hosted in the 9-story building, and the intensive care is on the 2nd floor in that building. And The first floor is occupied by the administration of the hospital, where there are no people with disabilities. And I think that it's easier for them to get to the second floor than for the people who need intensive care. And I've been working in this area since 2019, and my main focus is children. And when it comes to accessibility in our city, and I would like to thank the crowdfunding platform, My City, Moje Misto, and we were able to use this money to buy a vehicle for our patients. Because we have faced such a situation that we cannot help a person with rehabilitation because the person cannot get to us. This could be a child in a severe condition, and it cannot be brought to our hospital by his or her parents, or this is an adult who also requires proper transportation to be able to transport also his or her vehicle. And we used to have kind of invalid taxi. And Oleh Prokhorov is the head of the taxi. And he actually mentioned that there are so many regulations in that area that it was so difficult to work for him that he just gave up because it was impossible. Because there are barriers there to hinder the process. There are limitations in buying proper transportation. There are limitations with regard to different types of activities. There is a lack of possibilities in this area. And of course, people should earn money at work because everyone has families. And if you spend the whole time to work without any salary, this means that you need to find another job. And this means that you just cannot bring your dreams into lives. And quite often our patients, they just refuse to attend our classes because the lift is broken or there is no transportation. And I have one patient and her grandfather is sick. That's why she cannot attend our classes, because this is up for her grandfather to get her literally in his arm to our premises. Most things that are done in our city to create accessible environment are more about mere declarations or some pathos announcements about building some great rehabilitation center or some super hospital. And also the same comes about roads that are accessible. But unfortunately, there is no system in this. There is no thought in this. And everything which is done is superficial. And usually, everything they can do is to widen the entries to the buildings and to ensure a proper angle of ramps. Yes, everything is bad with accessibility, and this cannot but have an effect on rehabilitation. Many people cannot get access to rehabilitation, not because of the prices and the lack of professionals, but because many people, they cannot physically get out of their houses. They cannot get aid in hospitals because they need someone to bring in his or her arms to the second floor. Now I would like to give floor to our military, and thanks for joining us today. But I would like to say that Alexei Semaros, a veteran in Kiev, posted about a taxi for people with wheelchairs. If I'm not mistaken, this is Uklon company. And he says that for the first time over many years, there is a taxi there. Now I would like to give floor to Stas Meladze, serviceman. Can you please share your experience and the limitations with accessibility in the urban space? Yes, thank you. My experience started with the hospital that has been, like just mentioned. People with disabilities, people without limbs, without hands and legs, they stay in hospitals. And my personal experience is that initially I also was in an armchair in the hospital. There were ramps, but the angles was wrong. That's why every time I needed support of doctors or my friends. And when you leave a hospital, it is very difficult to get to a shop or to a supermarket. And after my discharge, I faced the issue of going outside, of leaving my apartment. There are the issues with our houses. The next problem that I faced were like handrails, and actually this is difficult for me to get to the park. As for the taxi, it is great, of course, but for example, I have a friend of mine. He is a serviceman, and he's in a wheelchair. Sometimes I help him. And you actually help him despite the fact that you have also the traumatic amputation. And actually, and our brothers in arms support each other. Roman, can you share your experience, Roman Horodensky, serviceman? How long have you been limited in your movements? I have I have been having disability since the beginning of summer. And in a hospital, there were some minor issues. And I don't have an arm and a leg till my knee. And crutches will not help me. And actually, I have been operated many times, and that was even difficult for me to use wheelchair. And this is even a problem for me to get outside to smoke. And that was in our Odesa hospital, where I stayed on the second floor. And to get outside, I had to ask other servicemen who helped there, doctors. And every time I had to ask them to help me to get outside. And I spent around 1 month in the hospital in one room, and I couldn't even get out. And twice they helped me to get outside. They put me in a bed there. Then they got me into the lift, and this is how they helped me to get outside when I was in hospital. Then I was discharged, and I had to return to hospital several times for dressing. And I would like to thank my friends, my brothers in arms, my mother, who put me in armchair, in the wheelchair. And we have a private house there, and we don't have special stairs there. And then we moved closer to our relatives, and there I faced another challenge. But this is the angle of the ramp there. And sometimes I needed the help of 3 persons to get me up using the tramp. And because my mother could not do this, and every time we had to ask our neighbors to get me up the tramp. The same is about the transportation, to get to dressing, to get to the hospital. There was a bus taxi, and it is impossible for me to get there because I have to jump upstairs there. And once I even fell down on my sore knee, and I understood that I could not use public transportation, those minibuses, to get to the hospital. That's why I had to use taxi. But with taxis, I also faced challenges, and so I had to wait for a long time. And actually, the taxi, sometimes taxi drivers told me that they don't have free place for wheelchair, and I had to call for another taxi. These are minor things, but they are very depressive. They affect the psychological and mental state of a person, because in such situations you feel helpless and you can't be on your own without support of others. That was really difficult for me. And then I went to Kyiv for prosthetics, and then I came back. And I live in a 5-story house, and there are no lifts, and it was difficult for me to get to the 4th floor. And I only learned how to walk using my prosthesis. People don't pay attention to this, but it is very difficult, and it is really very difficult even from the mental point of view. Thank you for sharing your story. Ruslana, can you tell about your experience, and then we can get to questions from the floor. Good afternoon. My leg is amputated over the knee, and I was in Odesa hospital. When I decided to go outside in a week, I understood that I could not do this by my own, because the lift in the hospital was not suited for a wounded person, because you need to hold doors there. The lift is very old, and it was impossible for me to use it on my own. As for the road is very bad. And it is very difficult to use it. I have a prosthesis now, but it is very difficult to walk because the roads are uneven, and I'm very likely to fall down. As for the public transport, and we have now new ambulances, and they are really great, but actually, I could not use it because I had crutches, and the ambulance was not suited for that. And it is very difficult even to open doors in the hospital, and I can't do this on my own. So I think that we should do something about these common things. Thank you. Thank you. Are there any questions from the floor? Please don't forget to introduce yourself. I have a question to Oleh. You mentioned that the injured servicemen and servicewomen refer to you. how do they find you? Can they Google you? And what is the aim of their addresses? How do you communicate with these people? Can you help them meet their needs? And how many people address you? And what is the real help that you can provide? This is the first question. And the second one, you've mentioned that you want to meet the mayor of the city or his deputy. Haven't they invited you? Do you know them personally? And what is the level of your communication with the municipal or regional authorities? I'd like to start from the second question. Unfortunately, I had only one visit to the city council, and the mayor was not there. They gave me a driver, and he just took me to the service center for IDPs for the military. So he took me there. I just talked with the manager, and that's it, actually. And the next week, Dmytro and I would like to have an appointment with the mayor or his deputy who is responsible for such issues. Because there are so many unsolved issues, and we need to do this, to do something about this. We have the accessibility committee, and I don't know if we have it in reality. I work in Odesa regional administration, and I talked with the chief architect of our region 3 months ago, and we agreed to cooperate, but that's it again. There is no work done, and we need to monitor the situation, because we have a problem with accessibility in our city. We have a lot of servicemen, we have a lot of IDPs on wheelchairs, and these people, they are scattered all over the region, and we try to help them. We refer to ombudsman. But when a person leaves a hospital, and this is the first contact after the injury, they are supposed to be supported by psychologists, rehabilitologists, and actually this person should get a wheelchair for it actually to be really convenient to operate by his or her own. Prostheses, wheelchairs, everything should be provided. And we wanted to be understood by the mayor of the city and by architects of our city and region. So people refer to you with complaints, and what do you do next? We so define the Department of Health, the Department of Social Protection, the Social Protection Department. We address to them. We also refer to Commissioner for Human Rights, who is in Kiev in the Cabinet of Ministers, and we try to solve these cases. What do you mean by solving? What answers you get usually? I would like to clarify the question. So you sent your claim, and what is the usual response? You've been occupying the position of Commissioner for Human Rights of People with Disabilities in Odesa Oblast for around a year now. What answers do you usually get? The different forms, sometimes these are food packages. There are some institutions where the public authorities were supposed to install lift, for example, and actually we have achieved that. And the Commissioner for Human Rights addressed even sometimes the prosecutor's office to solve the issue. So we try to provide help in any individual case. We record everything. And we send letters and requests to different departments. We also address the Ministry of Social Policy. So we try to solve all issues. And I would like to add a few words. For people to understand, it is the communication with the local managers, with local authorities, is very difficult. Without violating any regulation, they can. It can take 3 months for them to answer to our letters, to our requests. I worked with them for 8 years, and now I have a big box of letters for about 12 kilos. And there is no result. There is no significant result. That's why it is very difficult. Sometimes people believe that the issue should be just addressed and that will be solved. This is not like that. There is a manual regime to solve some situations. A friend of mine, Olena Olejnik, and that was publicly open information, faced some repairs in her yard, making it inaccessible at all. So they reconstructed something there. They have done their work, and they just left. And for her to improve the situation, it took 3 months. And she was able to address some of the manager in rayon of the community, and she was managed to have the situation solved. And I'd like to emphasize again that a lot depends on us. We need to raise issues, and we need to make local authorities responsible persons do their work. And I have a question to Dmytro. You mentioned that in 2018 you joined the Accessibility Committee. And I actually know about your situation. Now it is known about Luzanovka beach, and the contractor is now under investigation, and the responsible deputy is now occupied with other things. And now the question. So-called organizations with disabilities, they entrusted local companies with ensuring accessibility. But, for example, drugstores, they say that these are not our clients because if they are not accessible, these people cannot get there. So can you share more details about your experience? For people to better understand the situation, the issue of accessibility, infrastructure, and transportation is, so to say, privatized by the organizations for people with disabilities. They believe that they're responsible for that issue and no one should interfere with the issue. What is an organization for people with disability? We have around hundreds of them in Odesa. Most of them are founded only to be able to appropriate budget. But people should understand that accessibility is about every person, and I could make a simple example. For example, a person has both legs broken, and this person is on a wheelchair, but she is not considered a person with disabilities. But she will spend like 3 months in a wheelchair. And we should also be responsible for that issue as well. These are the population with the immobilities that encompasses pregnant women, elderly people, people with obesity for whom it is difficult to climb the stairs. So these are different groups of people. These are the people like parents with prams. So these are all of us. And we need to understand that accessibility is primarily about decent life for our children and for our parents. But our organizations for people with disabilities, and I would like to say that I'm sorry if it's insulting, but they have altered the notion of inclusiveness, because inclusiveness is for everyone. But they want, for example, to have an inclusive beach. And this reminds me about yellow stars in the concentration camps, because this is the way in nowhere. So should we have different beaches for people with disabilities, of people with hair impairment? The law says that any facility should be accessible for all people. We need to have equal rights, and this is the basic principle of our constitution. And people should understand that they should have this accessibility, that there are money envisaged in our budget, and huge money, which just spent inappropriately. Organizations for people with disabilities are supposed to represent interests of people with disabilities, but in reality, we have several active people with disabilities, and I cannot condemn them, because these people are very, so to say, regulated. And the aid which is provided by our authorities is targeted support. So if you support them, you will be able to get a wheelchair, a laptop, and you will be able to get some money. If you behave differently, then you will not get any support from them. So you mean that inclusiveness should be for the whole society and not for a separate groups of population, because any person can find him or herself in this situation. We unfortunately should stop here, and if the journalists who are here today would like to continue this communication with our guests, they will be able to do this, and I would like to thank our guests for being with us today. And I would like also call for the journalists who are watching us online to cover the topic. We will share with you the contacts of our today's guests, and we will do everything possible for national and international mass media to cover important issues for our society. Please stay tuned.